For you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I love to talk about this kind of stuff. I talk about the hardcore ins and outs of what happened in the races all the time. I enjoy having more general conversations like this. So thanks for having me. Yeah, I was a motocross fan from day one, just like most of the people probably that are watching were or are. Um, I was My dad worked for Bellray, which is an oil company that most of you probably heard of. He was not involved in the racing department or anything like that at all. He was like in the science lab, but going to visit my dad at work when I was like, I don't know, 6 years old, that had a bunch of magazines sitting on the counter in the lobby because that's what industry companies have. And I had never seen these things. I'm just old enough where this was not on TV. We didn't have the internet. It was like, what is this? And then we got to go to a big race at Unadilla. They were a big sponsor of that race. Again, my dad didn't know anything about the racing side at all. But once I expressed some interest, he's like, I think we sponsor some races we could probably go to. I'm from New Jersey, so Unadilla wasn't too far. So I got to see races in person. Thought it was the coolest thing ever. And from there, the best part was they said, hey, at the end of the month, no one reads these magazines. We just throw them in the trash. So your dad can just bring them home instead of throwing them out if you want. But this was literally like before I even learned how to read. Like I'm talking about being 5 years old here. So at one point, it's just my dad showing me the mags. And then I can remember, say, about 8 or 9 years old, I know what year this racing is, and I know how old I would have been at the time. I'm like, I'm just reading cycle news, I guess at age 8, just reading cycle news front to back. The only weird part about this is my parents still weren't really into it. So the idea of actually having a dirt bike or racing wasn't something we were going to do. I got some rinky dink quads so we could ride around in the woods. And I guess that was somewhat scratching the itch. But the idea that I was ever going to be allowed to race was never even brought up in my household. Like, don't even ask. That's never going to happen ever. And the idea of working in the industry wasn't a thing either, because there wasn't even an industry. How many people even had jobs, especially then? Even now, I think we are all so into it that we think this thing is a lot bigger than it is. It's not very big. It's a tiny, tiny niche of a market. And it was even smaller then. So the idea that I ever work in it was not even thought about. So to the point of here, I just went to college and planned on getting a regular job. I went to college for public relations. As you'd probably imagine, I like public speaking. I know most people don't. So I figured it'd be easy to get a job doing something most people don't want to do. The idea of working in motocross, never thought that would even be something worth pursuing. I got a little lucky that Davey Coombs started Racer X at West Virginia, which was the first even Eastern outlet for media. Back when I was growing up, everything was in California. Like, how are you gonna drive out there to get one of the 4 magazine jobs in the world that exist? Being a nobody, like that's not possible. But I at least thought, well, I could drive to West Virginia. I could meet these guys at a couple races. They were just starting the mag. I started sending them writing. I would go to all the nationals I could drive to and send them stuff. They'd post it on their website. And this is when the website had just started. There was no pay. And I just spent the last probably 2 years of college just networking. And really, my only goal was that I could always say that I knew those guys. And maybe I could even claim I was an intern at one point. And that was it. I just figured I would get a regular job, but I could always say, hey, you know that Davey Coombs guy? I actually knew him back in the day. We used to hang out a couple races when I was younger. And now I'm just a working stiff at a public relations firm in Manhattan or something. But kind of once you get that foot in the door, you don't give up. I just kept digging and digging and digging. Like I said, it was almost 2 years of going to races, sending them stuff. I actually got hired in their GNCC side covering the woods races because I knew stuff about quads because I used to ride them. That got me in the door. I was literally answering the phone of like a guy would call and say, I got a Yamaha Banshee with a dual pipes turned into one and an air filter. What class do I race? But I knew about those exhaust pipes and I knew about those air filters and I knew what class you should race. So I was doing everything, anything you could think of at GNCCs, picking up trash, flagging, writing stories, shooting photos. We didn't really have video yet at the time, but once they started a TV show, I was helping with that. And one day, Rodney Tomlin, who was still announcing at Loretta's with us until about 2 years ago, he was the main announcer at the time. He just said, hey, you're the writer and you shoot the photos. What do you think's going on in the pits today? And then I started talking to the mic, and he's like, you're really good at that. We should do it again next weekend. And then eventually they just hand me the mic for an hour, and he's like, I'm going to take a break. I'll come back. Then I'm 50% of the announcing team. Then it's like he does half and I do half. Then they started doing TV at GNCC. The TV production crew knew nothing about any of this racing at all. And they were just sending me 10 emails a day, like one every hour, asking a question about this guy and how does this rule work. And eventually they said, you know what? You know, it'd be easier than asking you all this stuff and telling our other announcers, why don't you just be the announcer for the TV show? So just like that, I was a TV announcer, and I was only, let's see, this is 2003. Yeah, I was 24 years old, and I had suddenly gone from graduating college 2 years earlier to being the TV announcer for GNCC. And it all worked out, and I'm still here 22 some years later.
I learned so much more about you
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
in those few minutes. And so Bell Ray is interesting because, Don and I are from New Jersey,
Yep.
and his family felt the same way. There would be no motorcycle racing. So he
Wow.
couldn't race until he could drive himself, and he bought his own bike. And
Yep.
I'll never forget the Bell Ray stickers, in the van and going to Unadilla and all
Oh,
of that.
wow. Yeah.
We
Yep.
were probably crossing paths, only, you were a little kid and I was
Right.
a lot older than you were. But
Yeah, I always make the joke. It was so, and being in New Jersey does not help. I mean, it's not a hotbed for motocross.
right.
Again, the sport is bigger now all around than it was then. I always say that I was probably 20 something before I ever met another person who knew anything about motocross. I never had a verbal conversation with anyone about the races ever. I would just read the cycle news. Then eventually by the 90s, the races were on TV. I'd watch them, but I didn't know a single other person ever who I'd met. And again, my dad wasn't into this either. He was in the science lab. So it was all Greek to him. He was involved with what kind of solvents we need to buy to get enough product to, make our numbers for the month. He was a math guy. So it's I always have that perspective. This is a tiny sport that we're in, and you got to make the most of it, but you also can't take anything for granted. We're all pretty lucky to be doing what we're doing.
Oh, 100%.
Yep.
And I'm fascinated that now I understand where all these answers from trivia come from. You studied all these magazines as a kid,
Oh, yeah.
the minute you could start reading. So for you not to have ridden, I mean, I know you had your quads,
Yeah.
you still have this passion, right, for the sport. And do you stem it back from when you were a little kid and you went out to Unadilla, or where did it actually?
Yeah. I don't even understand. I think you're either really into it or I guess you don't care about it at all. Yeah. I mean, I've never been sick of it. I've never been tired of it. And I will say, I always said, kind of like your husband, once I had a job, once I could drive myself, I was going to buy a bike and I was going to race. I just never thought I'd be working for Racer X when that job came. So, yes, I did at 23 buy a truck, buy a dirt bike. I did race locally. I was at the GNCCs anyway. So I was like, there's got to be a way I can turn this into some riding, right? So I convinced them, hey, if I'm going to take photos, I probably need a bike so I could ride around on the track to get to all the locations. It was really just an excuse to ride. Yeah, I raced High Point and Steel City, which were our local tracks there out of Morgantown. And I've been riding ever since. Obviously, this is not a sport that you're going to be very good at when you pick it up in your 20s. There were a lot of lost years for me that I wish I would have been riding earlier. But yeah, my buddy Kevin Kelly and I, who you know well, Andrea, we announced at Loretta's together. We make the joke. We will announce at Loretta's sun up to sundown and then go back to the hotel and watch either DVDs back then or watch stuff on YouTube from the races and talk about racing more. I have never, not one time in my life, said I've had enough of dirt bikes. Not one day in my life have I ever said I'm tired of this.
That's fantastic. Tim Cotter talks about that. He talks about that when we introduce the apprentice program at Loretta's every year, that he does not feel like he ever has a job because he loves what he does. And I think that is so important. And we talk to our school community about that too, because passion is huge. It's one of our core values at On Track School. So I think that speaks volumes, and it comes across. When you are doing your job, right? Everybody's feeling that passion that you have about our sport. So that's
Yeah, it is. It's easy when you're younger because you have no one else to answer to. If you're willing to work that hard, and if you're passionate about the sport, you are. Everything else, it all kind of melds together. That's what you want to do anyway. You'd rather be at the track than not be at the track. You'd rather go to the races than not go to the races. You'd rather work 7 days a week because it's what you like. And then eventually your friends really just become the people from the races anyway. So that's all you want to do. It does get more complicated, and keep this in mind for anyone that's watching this. As you get older, and then eventually you have a family and other things you have to answer to, that's where it gets complicated. I'll even go this far. I'll reveal this to everyone here. Because the sport is small, you're never going to make the equivalent amount of money that the same job in a bigger industry would make. Now, keep in mind, there are smaller forms of racing where you can't even make a living. There aren't full-time drivers or riders. There aren't full-time media people. Everyone's doing it as a hobby. This sport is at least big enough where there are some of us who are lucky enough. Eli Tomac's lucky enough where this is all he needs to do. You can go to your local car racing series and they work 9 to 5 and they just race on weekends. We're better than that. But I'm not making the same money the NFL announcers make, and I never will. And you're working probably harder than they are. And you just have to keep all that in mind. And if you love it, that's fine. But, you got a family to raise and other people to answer to. You've got to keep all that in mind. Hopefully by then you're savvy enough to make it all work. But just never lose sight of you're working in a fairly small sport. You're probably going to be overworked and underpaid to a certain amount. And it's the passion that makes you want to do it, which is fine. But sometimes you're not the only one with the votes. So you got to keep that in mind.
Exactly. Well, Tasha put in the chat, and she's right. And I think we might have talked about this at Loretta's. You're an original apprentice. When you
Pretty
think
much.
about, you went out there and you did what it took, anything and everything, right? You started sweeping, you were picking things up.
Yep.
And I think that's really an important work ethic that our kids today need to understand, that you're not never an overnight success. It's a lot of work. There's a lot of training. There's a lot of persistence, right? So what other characteristics can we talk about when it comes to just burning that road home? You have to keep going.
Yeah. We just mentioned the passion thing and how important that is. But the amount of people who I've seen through the years ask how they can get a job in this industry and whatever type of work they're good in. And they always start it with, I would like to do this because this is my dream. And I always tell them, well, that's cool, but there isn't a company on earth that's in the dream business. Every company on earth is in their own business. The only reason you're ever going to get hired somewhere is because you can do something for someone else. No company, and this isn't just in motocross, it's anywhere, they're only interested in what you can do for them. They're not there to make your dream come true. You're there to help them. So any job I've ever had, I've essentially worked at one company full time the whole time with Racer X, but everything else I've done is freelance gigs that I'm getting or getting hired for and trying to hold on to. I'm always taking the approach of, how can I help you do what you need to do? I'm just here to help. I'm just here to help you make your TV show better, or make your race better, or make the coverage better, or even in the case of Davey and everybody at Racer X, I'm here to help Racer X be better. Everybody's dream is to work in the sport that they love. But when there's 1,000 people that have that dream, why would you're not hiring 1,000 people? So I always say, figure out what you can do to add, and then tell them how you can add. The dream thing is cool, but that's not going to get you hired. Everybody has the dream of working in what they love to do for a living. But what can you actually do for the company that I'm running? That's your only value.
Yes. And when On Track started, I used to say, students think that education is the B plan.
Yeah.
This is our backup plan. But more and more now, because we had our 20th anniversary at Loretta's, parents and students are understanding the importance of education. It's not always like go to college now.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many vocational programs and different ways for people to learn, and the apprentice program is solving one of those needs. And we are really excited, that we had a grant from Honda last summer to help that program grow. And now it's growing more. And I'd like to think that even though, yes, it's important to look beyond the dream and see how can I help you, these experts are going on and getting jobs, and they're excited because they have this opportunity. At Loretta's last year, they were walking around with, big companies in our industry, and who has that opportunity? So you're right. This is that small. Where here you've got this group of apprentices. Tasha's walking around at Loretta's And here comes, Peacock and the people from Feld, and now they're really interested in growing with that program. So it's cool. Like you, I like to, even though I have my own organization, I have a team behind it. And I just feel so blessed to be able to help some dreams come true and help people continue to educate themselves and move forward.
Yeah, and everybody is helping the dream come true. I mean, everybody that's hired me did do that, but they're only doing that because I'm giving them something in return. So when someone sends me an email and says, I would like to work for, let's say, Racer X because it's my dream to go to the races, it's like, yeah, but what can you do that makes my department of the company better? That's cool that that's your dream, but what can you do for us in return? And the great thing about the apprentice thing is, yeah, there was zero pathway to what I wanted to do when I was starting to do that. So I don't wish my path upon anyone. I mean, I was literally just forging through the forest. I mean, at one point, I ended up at the Racer X office in August. Davey said, "Come on down. We got a job for you." Except they didn't give me a computer or a desk or a job assignment or even a paycheck for months. But he said, "Come down here." So I'm like, I think I have a job, except the only thing I don't have is any of the actual parts of a job that would be a job. But he said I have a job. So I'm going to make a job here. And what I'm going to do is find out where could they use the most help. And then after a while, by December, so this is 4 months, they eventually like, you really helped with the GNCCs. And then I got a paycheck. I don't wish that anyone would have to have that ridiculous of a path. Hopefully, the apprentice thing is like, hey, you have talent, apply for this position. People will see that you have talent and work ethic, and then we will find a place for you. I had to force all that to happen. Hopefully, the apprentice thing makes that a little bit easier road for people. Because before the apprentice program, these things were happening. People were working their way up from the bottom, but it's really hard when there's zero pathway cleared out to do that in a more formal way that the apprenticeship does now.
Well, you bring up a really important point, and the team has developed a pathway where there's an application process and there's a vetting process. In the beginning, it was a little bit, we had to bring it in,
Yeah.
limit
Yep.
the age group, find out what is the talent. But I think that's a really important message, Jason, to future apprentices or anybody going out there to work is, yes, you have a dream, but what can you offer to make somebody's business, somebody's job, some task that you're hired to do better? How can you stand out? And you obviously did that, and you did it the hard way. And then you were given the mic, you know?
Yeah. Yep. Yep. I didn't even ask for that because I figured everybody, that's the glory job. That's the cool job, right? Everybody wants to be TV star. So I didn't ask to do that because I figured if I asked first, it would probably put everybody's defenses up a little bit like, oh, you think you're good? And I didn't want any resistance. So I was always playing the I'm just here to help in any way, shape, or form card. And that worked because Rodney or even Tim Cotter, who was announcing at the time, they never saw me as a threat. They just saw me as an asset, as someone who's going to help them. And to that degree, as far as the Nationals are concerned, for Tim Cotter, he was the one of the main announcers for the Nationals, but Loretta's is really his big project. And around the Washougal time of the season, it really wasn't benefiting him to go to Washougal for 4 days when he really needed to be at Loretta's. So guess who he eventually says, hey, can you take my job for the weekend at Washougal? He asked me because we're partners. We're working together at the same company. It's not I'm trying to take his job and he's trying to take my job. There ends up being plenty of room going around once you're in. You just got to get in, which, yeah, you do that by saying, hey, I am just here to help everybody.
So what's next? I saw you went over to England, and then I was thinking I was going to be hearing you announcing. I must have missed something.
Yeah, I've always wanted to go. It's crazy. I'd never gone to Motocross of Nations in Europe. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. I always wanted to. I just didn't feel it was right after being gone every weekend for the first 9 months of the year to ask for a 5 day hanging out with the boys trip in Europe. That just wasn't fair to my family. So I did say once everyone was old enough, we could all go to Europe together, we would do it. And everybody's finally at that point. So I got to bring my son with me. He's 10 now. He travels. It's no problem. It's not like bringing a toddler on a 7 hour flight. And I did reach out to the in front people who run that series. And I'm like, if you want me to help, announce, but kind of the same thing. They have their own program going. I don't want them to think that I'm like, well, I'm here now, I'm
Yeah.
taking over, or I'm moving people out of the way. I'm here if you need me. But for me, the big thing was I was always wanted to do the television announcing for Supercross. I'd actually not been able to do that. They used to have an audio webcast back in the 2000s. I was pretty young and I got that job again because a guy quit like a month before the season began and they were in a scramble. And they called the Racer X office and like, Davey, do you know any announcers who are available in the wintertime? And he's like, well, I got this dude who's doing GNCCs. He knows Supercross. Give him a shot. Uh, so I got the job. And this is 2005. I mean, I'm in my early 20s and I get this. They didn't have live TV at the time. They only had live audio. So I'm doing that. And I'm like, well, inevitably, the TV thing will come about. I don't know if it's going to be 5 years or 10 years. It'll happen. Well, it definitely wasn't happening. And then eventually that audio webcast went away because TV turned to live. They didn't need that anymore. And I actually ended up squeezed out. And then I just thought that would never happen. That was like the main thing that I hadn't done that I always wanted to do. And it didn't actually happen until this year, 2024. So I don't really know what's next. I think my only goal now is to just keep the job. That's it. I've done some other stuff. I got to do NASCAR for a while. That was great. But again, if you're putting in this level of work, you might as well do it in the thing you like it the most. I was fine doing it in NASCAR. I learned a lot. I crammed. It's like you folks taking a test. It was cramming for tests on a daily basis for sure. And I was willing to do it because that was what the job required. But I'm way happier here.
Oh, that's awesome. I love listening to you announce Supercross. And I'm glad you got to take that trip with your family. I think
Yep.
that's really important, right? It's an important balance to be
Yes.
able to go and do those fun
Well,
things.
that's what I was saying before. Eventually, you have to start figuring out how you can balance. When you're 25 years old and you're single, you can go to 52 races a year, no problem. Eventually, you got to figure out other ways to make it work and to kind of massage the system. So that's what you got to do.
No,
Yep.
it's
Cost me a
tricky.
lot of money to bring 4 people to England for a week. I can tell you that.
I'm sure. I'm sure. And a long plane ride. I
Yes.
haven't been in a while, but um, NASCAR is interesting and our sport, when you know this sport as long as you do, and as long as my family's been involved in it, and then you go to a NASCAR event and you try and learn that. Like we went to the NASCAR Youth Series in Charlotte this weekend. It was on the calendar and it was good reason to go early and get out of Dodge before the hurricane. Um, and you're learning quarter midgets. These are quarter midgets. I don't know if you've seen them.
Oh,
And
yes.
so
Hilarious. Yeah.
I show up on tracks, a sponsor, and we haven't gone yet. We went, and I just really felt like I had such a naive moment. I was like, okay, well, where's the track? Because we're at this beautiful Charlotte
Yep.
way.
And you're in the tiny little thing in the front, right?
Well, I thought that's where we were going, but we were exactly where we were parked when we went up to SMX.
Oh, is that the dirt track?
No, they set it up in the parking lot.
What?
In the parking lot. Yeah,
Wow.
where the vendors would have been. And they put up these barricades and I thought, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But then when I was watching the race of these little quarter midgets, I'm talking 3 to 16 years old, getting in a car I don't think I can fit in. And they're
Yeah.
right on each other's tail. And then you talk to people and they can go in various directions from there. It's so different than motocross. I feel like our world is really small. Like these kids are training to go to Loretta's, they go to Loretta's, they go to Supercross. These kids can go into things called legend cars. I don't even know all the names. I have to
Yeah,
cram.
good point. Yeah, it's like they've got trails all we have like one path and they have all these trails, all these different ways. That's where I live. I live in Mooresville. We even on our water tower here, it says Race City, USA. This is kind of where most of the NASCAR shops and stuff is. So the reason I live here is I always say if you're an actor, you live in Hollywood. If you're a politician, you live in Washington, D.C. If you announce races, you live in Charlotte. It's just where you live. Ralph Shaheen and I live, he lives 5 minutes from here. It's just how you do it. So occasionally I run into those folks in that former work. And yeah, none of the problems we have are unique to us. I mean, there are parents going all in, moving across the country to live here, to get those kids in those cars or a go kart, all those different paths you're talking about. And they're making big sacrifices. And a lot of that, yeah, for sure. I'm sure they're doing, some of them are probably in on track school. They're doing everything they can at a very young age to succeed. It's just like motocross. It's not you're doing it casually until about 20 years old, and then you become a professional and you make millions of dollars doing it. Those days are long gone.
They are, and you're right. They are putting everything into it and traveling across the country doing the same stuff. So the heart's the same, the
Yep.
passion's the same, and
Yep.
it was a great opportunity. Um, for public speaking, we have a lot of parents that specifically ask, does On Track help students with public speaking? And because of the apprentice program, we did create a class. It's kind of an intro to apprenticeship. And we talk a little bit about it. But what advice would you give, to students who, are looking to elevate their public speaking and get more comfortable?
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you asked because the two things I'm probably best at, the public speaking and writing, are generally things that people think you either have it or you don't. But it's really not any different than anything else. Yes, there is. It's just like writing. Yes, there is a level of talent that does help, but it's not like you cannot get better without work. It's not like you can't improve at it, just like anything else. So on the public speaking side, two things. We all generally have things we want to say. I've done some media training for writers before, and I'm like, you're doing the craziest, coolest thing in the world, both what happens in the races and then this cool lifestyle you have. Surely you have a few interesting things to say. Now, I get if you're doing it all the time and everyone else around you is also doing it, it probably seems normal, but it definitely isn't to most people. You get to ride dirt bikes multiple times a week or travel the country, all that stuff. That's not normal. There's got to be something interesting that happened either this week or during this race. You surely have something to say. And everyone's been in an argument with their friend and you're trying to get one more word in. You've got one more thing that you want to say. Think of it like that. This is an opportunity. You get to say what you want to say. You get to give your opinion on something or explain something. If you're in an argument with someone, you would love to get even 2 more seconds to say something. That's what this opportunity is. They're literally saying whatever you want to say, you have the chance to say it. So you might think you don't have anything interesting to say. You do. Second thing is just be yourself. As a racer, especially, I say it all the time. There's room for everyone. People love Eli Tomac right now. I mean, he is a legend at every track we go to. He is not Travis Pastrana as a personality. He's not. He's very introverted, in fact. But there's a massive group of fans that probably say, I like that. That's my style of guy. I'm the quiet guy who'd rather just put in the work and let the work speak for itself and then go home to my family. Whatever you are, there is a person that's going to resonate with that. So don't try to be someone that you're not. But even Eli has things to say. He can explain what happened in the race at the end of the interview. So those are the two main things. Figure out something interesting that happened. There always is. Just be yourself. Don't try to be someone you're not. And the third thing is don't try to script anything. If you try to memorize a script, the first thing that's going to happen is like the third sentence of it, you're going to get wrong. And then you're going to say, oops, I'm messing up. And then you're really going to go haywire. But here's the thing. No one watching even knew that you messed up the third sentence. They didn't know what the script was. So scripts and all those things can help to rehearse. Probably makes you feel calmer because you feel more prepared. But if you try to make anything memorized, look, anyone on this call here has probably had an argument with their girlfriend or their boyfriend, and you probably rehearse how it's going to go when you tell them something. It never goes that way. It never does. Same thing with the speech. It's never going to go exactly as you planned in your head the 100 times you ran it down. So just try to think of the general things you want to say, but never try to memorize. It'll never happen. And then you'll put yourself in a tailspin because you're messing up. And people can't even tell that you messed it up because they didn't know what the script was in the first place.
I think that's great advice. I was sitting here taking notes.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. If you raced a dirt bike for 20 minutes and nothing interesting happened in the race, you got serious problems. There's something interesting to say. You might have saved something. There might have been a whip that you thought was cool, a section of the track that was tough. It's all out there. I know it gets monotonous when you're doing it all the time, but it exists.
It's true. And if people are focused on being like somebody else, you
Yeah.
lose your authenticity
Yep.
and you lose the flavor of who you are. And I think Eli Tomac is a great example. Eli and my son Michael grew up racing together, and I'm really enjoying watching him and really growing into his own.
Yep.
So everybody does have a place. I think that's a really important point. I used to be petrified to speak. I was a shy kid. I was very introverted. My dad was a singer. He used to pull me up on the stage, sing me a lullaby. I was like 10 going, "Oh, this is ridiculous." I just didn't like it. But you can improve. I always still want to improve. You can always improve it by putting yourself out there. I always tell the kids that on track, if it's uncomfortable, and you want to grow, go there. So I have taken kids and I have thrown them up in the booth with you, our ambassadors, and given them that opportunity because I think if you don't have that opportunity, you can't, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, and you can tell. I mean, some of them are naturals at it. Some are super nervous. I will
Right.
tell you this: if it's specifically our situation, I can't speak for outside of motocross, but none of the announcers want it to go badly. We're going to do everything we can to get the best out of you and make you relaxed and make it easy. I actually catch myself if you watch me on TV when, say, Carmichael or Stewart is talking, I'm nodding a lot more than I probably should. I don't need to do that with them, but that is a force of habit of me trying to let a 18-year-old who's never done this, when they're speaking, I'm trying to let them know you're doing a good job. You're doing a good job. Keep it coming. Keep it coming. And I'm nodding probably too much. I don't need to do that at the super professional high end level, but it's a habit of trying to let you know we're here for you. We're going to give you a safety net. We're going to make it as easy on you as possible because we want this show to be good. We want you to sound good. It helps us. It helps you. So don't think that anyone is the enemy. Whoever's holding that microphone is probably trying to help. And the other, this is a very minor detail. It's weird. We're all used to having regular conversations of people where, like, when you say something, they're probably looking you in the eye to some degree and they're nodding. And then they say something and then you say something. That's like a normal conversation, right? When you're public speaking, it's a one-way conversation. So there are times you're going to look at the crowd, and the crowd, I say this all the time when I do media training, the crowd's going to be looking at you like this. They're not nodding and reacting to everything you're saying because it's not a normal conversation. That doesn't mean that they actually aren't listening. It's just they don't need to give those conversational cues. They're one of 1,000 people standing there watching. But sometimes you see that and you're like, oh man, I'm doing something wrong. They're not paying attention. Are they not hearing or understanding what I'm saying? What's the problem? There isn't a problem. It's just you're the speaker and they're just sitting there listening. They're not nodding and actively listening. So sometimes it's better to just not even look until you realize that that's a normal thing and it's not anything you're doing wrong. Because I know when you're up there, it's real easy to start. I already messed up this script I memorized. I'm looking at the crowd and they seem bored. And then you really start freaking out. And the number one goal, obviously, is to not freak out.
I might have to have some training for graduation speeches because I don't write it down because that does trip me up. And I
Yeah, it's
do
good.
look out at the audience and they, I feel like that.
They do that, right? They're just
Yeah,
staring at you.
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. That is a
yeah.
really good example. Okay,
Yep.
I've got
But think
that.
about being in that audience. If you were 20 rows back, why would you be looking at the speaker, nodding and acknowledging everything they said? You would never do that. You're just sitting there listening.
That is very true.
Yeah.
That has helped me. I've learned
There
something
you
really
go.
important.
There you go.
Okay, well, we've had a lot of fun doing trivia questions up there in the
Mhm.
tower. And they're a lot of fun. It's so hard to fact check. So I thought, I'm just going to ask you some on-track trivia
Oh,
questions.
wow. Wow. It's a
Actually,
twist.
fact, I know them. And I might call on Tasha if she's game. I'm going to ask you the first question. Maybe Tasha and I could go back and forth a little bit because she loves it. And I want her to feel, like she's a part of it. So, Jason, there were only two graduations in all of our years that were not held at Loretta Lynn's, and they were at specific races. Do you know what tracks they were held at?
I only know one, unfortunately. I was there for Daytona. That was a really cool one. That was last year Daytona? Was that 2023 Daytona? I believe. I
That'd
think
be 22.
22 now. Wow, that's
Yeah.
sad how quickly time goes. Yeah, that was at the Ricky Carmichael amateur race. And I remember that one because my son raced the amateur race, and then my mom was there. She had never watched him race before, and she thought that was the coolest thing, that there was this graduation school component tied in. I had to explain to her, well, we're not doing this at 31 races a year. This is actually pretty exceptional. We don't always have this. I don't know if she really understood that. She must have thought, oh, wow, that's cool. They have like a school part at every
Right.
single race all year. Not quite. And then it was Ricky Carmichael graduating, which was a really cool story. He didn't have to do that. He's got plenty of money. He doesn't need an education to get any sort of job. But it was a really cool example that he just did it because he felt it was a thing he should do.
Yeah, and his goal was to do that before his twins graduated, and it
That's
was
right.
really fun. It was just an honor. So
Yep.
yes, that is one of them. And the other one was, a pretty well-known graduate that could not make it to Loretta Lynn's because they went pro. Trying to help you out here a little bit.
Oh, yes. Hayden Deegan graduated, but where was that?
High Point.
Oh, yes. And Tim Cotter threw the robe on and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Now I have to ask myself, was that 23?
Yeah, that would have been 23. I think this was all 23. That's what I'm going
But
to go
yeah,
with.
Ricky was 23 too, so I didn't want to
Yeah.
interrupt. But yes, Ricky and Hayden
Yes.
both were 23.
Oh, okay. I was wrong. Okay. You were right on the 23 part.
See,
Okay.
I did not know that the Deegan thing. See, even I didn't know that was an exception. I thought this occasionally just happens here and there. I did not know that both of these things were very specific. They don't normally happen where they happen.
Yes. Those were definitely special events. And I loved when Tim got his gown on. And I saw the video today when I was fact checking myself.
That's cool. That's cool.
Okay. Do you know the very first graduation year for On Track School at the ranch?
No, but I'm going to try to do math because you say this is your 20th anniversary. But I don't know if you had it the very first year. So let me just pretend you didn't. This is, look, you folks are in school. Let's say you take tests, right? You try to take the best. Sometimes you're just taking the best guess you can. So I'm going to say 2010.
You're close. It was 2008.
There you go. I'm just guessing sometimes, people.
You
Yep.
were very close. And it's really funny because Davy Coombs,
Mhm.
who hired you,
Mhm.
he asked me, family of educators, knew I had this little group I was working with. And he said, would you mind, I don't know, judging the essay contest of how I spent my summer vacation? And I said, I would love to judge that contest, that essay contest. Do you mind if I call a couple of kids on stage? And so we've been having graduation there ever since, which is so
Nice.
awesome. Tasha,
Yeah, most people would not believe that the reason Loretta's it's so far from where it started. The reason Loretta's takes place in the first week of August is because that's basically the last week of summer before anyone's school would have started. Now, I think there's probably some parts of the country that actually even start right around then. But that's essentially why that date was picked. And then the other big amateur race at the time, Ponca City, was right around that time, so you couldn't move it up any earlier. But that was it. It's like we have to get this in before back to school. And I only explain that because that's how important the school part is to the people that started the event. So in this case, now let's have the graduation there.
yes,
Yep.
absolutely. Yeah. Tasha, do you have a trivia question for Jason? It would not be a trivia game if you weren't involved.
That's right.
Ooh, okay. Let's see. So we've already talked about Hayden Deegan and Ricky Carmichael that have graduated from On Track. Can you name at least, I'll make it easy on you, 3 more professional motocross athletes that graduated from On Track?
I know Malcolm Stewart, right? That's one.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I'm trying to remember when you guys give us the postcards and flyers every year
Uh-huh.
at Loretta's. This shouldn't be that hard. Ryan Dungey?
No.
That's too early. That's probably you're probably just
too early.
that's too early. That's right. Yeah, because he's going 20 plus years. Yeah, give me 2 more. Go ahead.
I feel like we need sound effects.
I
Yeah.
know,
Yeah,
right?
like a real game show. Like a real
Excellent.
game show. Yes.
Yep. So
Yep.
Well,
we've got
you have to know one just for why On Track was
Oh,
created.
well, yes. I mean, I didn't want to cheat and say Michael Lieb. I mean, that I don't even know if that one should count. That's like getting a wild card when you're playing card games.
right. Oh
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Aaron
you want to
Plessinger.
take another stab? Aaron,
Aaron
no,
Plessinger?
no.
Give me one more.
Okay. Okay. Well, let's see. We've got Joe Shimoda, um, Daxton Bennick, Casey Cochran, um, uh, let's see, Evan Ferry. We have um oh my gosh, I just looked at this list the other day. Zoe, chime in here. I just gave you a list from the races.
See, I should have deferred to just using current young guys who probably just graduated in the last year or two. Like
That's
I
a
knew
good
Dax
one.
did. I should have done
Yeah,
that. Should have just went with the younger guys. I was trying to get like crazy
there
and be
you
like, I
go.
can't believe how this started.
No, that's okay. Listen, if you started asking me motocross questions,
Mhm.
you're doing
Oh
great.
yeah. Ryder D.
What
Francesco. Yeah,
about
so I mean, the list goes on, but just off the top of my head, there you go. There's a few of them.
you might be referring, thank you, Tasha. You might remember the year we actually made cards for individual riders. And that's when we had a Malcolm card. That might be what you're remembering. We had an Ian Treadle card, a Malcolm card. Those were cool. We could
That
go
could have
back.
been it. Yep. Yeah, exactly. And one other thing, and I learned this on the side here where I live with the NASCAR folks. There are often siblings, right, that are involved, and you can't do the regular school thing because you're traveling so much. This is a situation you were even in, and your family. Uh, I would assume that leads to a lot of siblings doing this as well, correct? And their plan is not to race for a living. Their plan is to do something else.
Yes, and Tasha, I think that the percent of siblings, is it still around 28% of our enrollment?
There you go. Yep.
Yeah, it's pretty high and it's climbing up there. And then in your area with the NASCAR, going back to what we were talking about earlier, that percent has grown too. I want to say we're somewhere around maybe 15% NASCAR related for four wheel. I just pulled it last night. Now I can't find my spreadsheet, but it's definitely a bigger chunk of that pie and growing. Motocross is still our biggest sport that our families and our students participate in, but definitely that four wheel area is growing for sure.
I like to think that there are certain areas where, although this is not the biggest or most successful sport, there are some things that we have really refined and we've gotten very good at. So I would like to think that this is one of them. I mean, that'd be cool, right? If On Track ends up involved in all these other things and it traces back to, well, you know where it actually started? It actually started in motocross. I've covered a lot of different racing beyond this. Shout out in the DeCarols there in the chat room mentioning, yes, you should mention you covered Moto America, which is road racing, which I did for a few years, and flat track and NASCAR and off-road truck racing, all of it. The cool thing is, whenever you say the main thing you do is motocross, there's no other form of racing that ever doesn't say, well, that's cool. Whether it's the biggest or not, everyone respects it. No one thinks it's lame. So I feel like to have that, it started with motocross tag is always a help. It's kind of a badge of honor. They know, even if they don't follow it, they know it's pretty darn cool.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, it is funny that we're still going to Loretta's. Michael won there in 09 and we're still going there. And,
Yeah.
I love it. I love the community. Just seeing through these hurricanes of the community at our school coming together, a lot of these moto families to say, hey, come stay with us. We've got hookups, that I have chills just talking about it. So yes, I will always say that it started at Moto. And I feel like when I go to Loretta's, I'm going on my family vacation because I am.
That's true.
Back
Yeah.
to the
That's what
family
you're used
ranch.
to. Yep. Yep.
Well, Jason, thank you so very much. I want to turn this over to our team and some people with us that are in the chat and say, if you have any questions for Jason, you want to come off your mic or you want to type it in the chat before we sign off? We want to be respectful of his time. We'd love to hear from you before we sign off.
Yep. I'm here if anybody's got anything.
It's quiet. I'm afraid to click my chat button sometimes because my Apple screen goes away. There we go. Here's a question. I think everyone in Moto America had a ton of respect for you when you came in and did your research to know everything you needed to know in the street bike races. How was the switchover and did you learn a lot?
Yeah, thanks for that. That might have been the most proud I've ever been of a gig that I've done. I think I got a call on Tuesday if I could be at a road race on Friday. It's at the VIR in Virginia. This was 3 years ago. I think this was 2021. And you always take the job. You always say yes. So it was one of our old producers from motocross had started working for that series and they needed some help that weekend. Someone didn't make it or got sick. I don't even know why. And they just said, do you follow it? And I said, of course I do. I certainly didn't follow it as much as I let on. It's motorcycle racing. So I'm always watching it to some degree, but to the point where you could be appearing knowledgeable or an expert on camera. I was far from that on Tuesday. But it's the same thing that you folks are learning here. Again, you know the difference between cramming for a test and being an expert for one day of the few things you're going to be asked or have to know about. And some people are passing the science test. That doesn't mean you're actually going to be a scientist, right? You might not be a lifelong master of the field of science, but for that day, you've got to be pretty darn good at it. So there was a lot of fake it till you make it there. And the little tip that I always give, if you have an interesting story about 4 riders, it appears that you probably have 30 more that you just didn't have time to get in. But in reality, you might only had 4. I might only had time to have 4 conversations. But if I tell 4 things, it sounds like, man, he must have endless amounts of info. And what really helped there, the paddock was great. I mean, they were so easy to work with. Motocross isn't as welcoming in some ways. When you're the noob, I've seen it. It's kind of unfortunate. The amount of pit reporters that I've helped come along when they got thrown at the last second. And it's like, I really got to open doors for them and introduce them and tell them that this person's okay and you should chat with them. Moto America and some of the other sports, they're so helpful as far as the moment I showed up, I'm like, hey, I'm the reporter for TV today. And they're like, let me tell you some stuff. And that goes back to how you guys can help yourselves with when you tell us stuff, it makes you sound better. We're only there to help you and you're only there to help us. That's that same old thing. So yeah, I was really shocked at the words that were coming out of my mouth. I'm like, I can't believe I just knew all that. I didn't know anything about this on Tuesday, and here I am on Friday. But it's kind of like the old cramming for a test. You can know a lot more on Tuesday than you did on Monday if you pull an all-nighter studying, right?
Absolutely. I was a crammer in high school.
Yeah, I don't recommend it, but sometimes it's the way you got to do it.
I know.
Yep.
I know. That was a great question, Levi. Thank you for that.
Yep.
There's a question from Austin. What is your favorite track to announce at?
Yeah, I'll bring it full circle here. We do still go to Unadilla every year. And at some point during that weekend, I will try to remind myself. I'm like, I cannot believe I'm still here and I'm still doing this. I mean, I went to the race when I was, I think, 6, just randomly in this crowd, not even having ever watched a dirt bike race before. And just be like, I'm doing this. That is crazy. And I probably have that feeling to some degree at every event, but that one's the one that really drives it home. Because it's like, I'm still here, I'm still going, but I can't believe I'm doing what I'm doing now. Because that was the home race for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I can see that. Yeah, very cool. Okay, last call for questions. It's a great opportunity. And these are great questions. So
yeah, they are. They are. Yep.
Okay, I think we're good.
Thanks, everybody. Always happy to tell these stories because in the end, again, it's only helping us if you find your niche. And yeah, you mentioned at the beginning that some people see the education thing as the plan B. However you want to classify that, nobody likes hearing the sad stories, right? everyone's always going to like hearing a success story. And whether that's because of the racing results that you got or what you were able to create outside of that or after racing or whatever that might be, it's kind of that same motocross thing that we said before. Like, that's so cool when someone does something, started in motocross, they go on to success elsewhere. I think we all like that. So any way that any of us can help make that kind of thing happen, I think we all take some pride in that. The racing thing is probably the coolest part. But there's a lot of pride when someone who used to race or did race before goes on to success somewhere else. I think we all root for that too.
Yes, absolutely. We have a lot of stories about that in our school. Kids that have gone on to racing and then they go on to college or they go on to flight school. We have a ton of pilots that don't race anymore. There's still that
Wow.
adrenaline junkie thing. I mean, there are some. I mean, Tasha, right? We have a whole family of pilots for Southwest Airlines, and they were all people we met in moto. So we have a lot of those stories to share, and I agree with you. It's great to be able to go on and take what you've learned and apply it somewhere else and go on to do bigger and better things.
That is cool. Wow. Didn't know that. Okay. So that's good for the next trivia contest. I'll be ready.
Yes. Yeah, we'll have
Yep.
some pie charts.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, thank you, Jason. Say hello to your family, get some rest, and we'll see you soon.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. And
Okay.
I'm off to baseball practice for my son because if it's not this, it's that, it's something else. We're all doing basically the same thing all the time. We're all going nonstop all the time. It's not just me. Yep.
Well, good. Enjoy.
Thanks, everybody.